So welcome. I'm excited to be here. As Rory said, my name is Ryan Skinner. I'm an analyst with Forrester Research, working on the marketing and strategy side. My focus in research is in content marketing, that is helping marketers develop strategies to do content marketing right. In that context, just this past January, I did a report about native advertising specifically. As you can imagine, we had a lot of interest from marketers and from publishers. And this report was intended to help marketers think about how to approach native advertising. And I had a colleague who did a sister report about native advertising for publishers. So I'm excited to be joined here today by Abby Carvalho from Group MD with Bauer Media, and Stephanie Himoff from, she's the MD for Outbrain UK. Just to set the stage, in talking to Rory back in the green room, says native advertising, what's that? So native advertising really, I guess, first emerged as a term of art back in 2011 when a VC used the phrase in a conference. But it was really last year that it basically exploded into the kind of media consciousness. In talking to people for that report, they talked about how early last year they would have to explain what native advertising was at the beginning of the year, the publishers and the agencies, when they were talking to marketers. Towards the end of the year, they had marketers voluntarily coming proactively at them and saying, help me do this native advertising thing. So, tremendous growth. Just to set the stage about what native advertising is. For the report, we defined it, and this is the definition that we use for native advertising. Any form of paid or sponsored content that directly and transparently contributes to the experience of the site or platform where it appears, by aligning with the format, context, and purpose of that site or platform's editorial content. And you'd recognize content marketing from the kinds of promoted links that appear at the bottom of, for example, CNN articles, and also from, for example, sponsored content that appears in The Atlantic or Huffington Post. Also promoted tweets on Twitter or sponsored updates. These are also examples of native advertising. And it's been growing very rapidly. It's at, eMarketer said it was at about 2 billion. The prognosis is 20% growth year on year. So it's getting bigger and more exciting. But there's a bit of a dark side to native advertising too, and that is the concern that it relies a bit on deception of readers in order to establish the value. And that's been a concern. The FTC, the United States Federal Trade Commission, had a hearing late last year in which they brought a lot of parties together to discuss it. And that was inconclusive, effectively, but they didn't come drastically down for or against. But there have been a number of critics to native advertising, including Jeff Jarvis, who was moderating a panel earlier today, where he said some advertisers are conspiring with desperate publishers to erase the black lines around ads. So great promise, great excitement, but also some concerns for native advertising. We'll try to address a few of these. I'd like to give Abby and Stephanie a moment to just introduce themselves and talk about their background with native advertising. So Abby, why don't you start?
I'm responsible for our brands that we create out of London, so brands such as FHM, Heat, Grazia, etc. And I think, we are in the business of understanding our audiences. We're in the business of creating great, engaging, inspiring, entertaining content for them. And I think we have therefore been in the business of native advertising for quite a period of time now, but as you say, over the last kind of 12 months, it's very much come to the fore. And I think for our business, it's come to the fore whilst we've been very much kind of under the skin of the 20-something audience due to a brand that we've just launched called The Debrief. And I think part of our kind of 12-month work talking to this audience, this 20-something, very much digital native, is kind of how does advertising kind of work in her kind of media experience. And what we really found from her was that it has to be authentic, and she really understands kind of the business of advertising and kind of what advertising means in the kind of digital space. But they don't want to be hoodwinked, for want of a better word, but they do want to have engaging, great content. And for them, as long as it's value-adding, it's entertaining, it's engaging to them, it's great content. And I think if we're in the business of understanding our audiences, understanding the content that we want to create for them, whether or not that's our content straight from us or it's our content that we've thought through with advertisers, I think that's a good thing, because it's got to start from the consumer, and the consumer has to be at the heart of it.
And Stephanie?
Yes, Stephanie Himoff. I head up the UK business for Outbrain. For those of you not familiar, Outbrain is a native advertising amplification platform whereby we provide two services to publisher. The first services is where we leverage our technology to provide recommendations that are actually personalized based on user preferences. The second service is, this service, by the way, comes free of charge. Our business model is based on paid recommendation, whereby we display paid recommendation in a very native placement, our publisher pages. And I think, so, we are in a native advertising business by definition, by taking, again, and helping marketeers and publishers to expand their reach through a wider audience across our network. We work with over 600 premium publishers across the globe. Many of you are here with us today, including Bauer Media. And what we have discovered, the reason why we've been able to earn the trust of our publisher readers is because we have been delivering great content recommendation. And the trust is very essential here. We see a lot of ad network coming into the marketplace today with different business model. They kind of have a widget that looks like the Outbrain widget at the bottom of the page, but they don't link from content to content. They link from content to advertisement. And I think that's a very risky move, especially for the media brands, right? Because you have, using your core assets, and you've spent years in building the brand equity into those publications. And the biggest asset is the trust that the user have into a publication, the content and the brand. And by not being fully transparent, obviously the risk is to deteriorate the trust of the users. That's something that we monitor very carefully. 50% of actually the promoted links that come into the network are not passing through our content guidelines, just because we feel they just will not add any value to our publishers' journey.
Right, sure. I mean, you start touching on an important issue there. There's what is content, what is advertising, where does the line go? Mm-hmm. I think I'm going to open the floor to questions in a bit, but I'd like to kick off by asking the panel about the issue of deception. Some of these critiques have come out that the issue being that native advertising relies to a certain degree, it's inherently deceptive on getting people to click on an ad when they were after native content. Maybe not willfully, but maybe that's driving the value proposition. How do you guys respond to that charge?
I think you just have to be really clear, and you have to be, you have to have whatever your labeling is, you have to have it that it's really clear for that audience that it is advertising content. So for us on the debrief, we have worked with partners, and our words for it is so-and-so, so H&M, for example, made this happen. So it's really, really clear. And, it has to be in the voice of the brand. I think that's what we've kind of learned, where it is difficult and you need to make sure that it's not deception, is that it's not about a brand just promoting the brand. It's about creating great content that is going to be engaging and entertaining and offers value. And if it is just promoting that brand, it doesn't offer that value. So therefore, in my kind of explanation and description of what native advertising is, that isn't native advertising. It's got to form the kind of premise of value adding to the consumer and to the brand itself. And the marking and the labeling of that is critical.
Sure. So where does the responsibility really lie? Does it lie with the publisher? Does it lie with the advertiser? A bit of both?
It's both. It's got to be, because I think this is the critical thing. If you're creating native advertising with a partner, it's got to be with a like-minded partner. If that partner doesn't believe in the authenticity and the credibility of that content that you're creating, I think it's up to the teams in Bauer, for example, to really understand the objectives of that brand and to work out how can we do it and how can we do it in a really credible and authentic way that talks in the voice for that consumer that will therefore be value adding. And if that advertiser brand is not like-minded, then you shouldn't be doing it, and I think there has to, and that goes to your point around trust, because at the end of the day, what's really important to us is trust, and that's what our brands stand for. So we have to work really closely with like-minded advertisers, and I think like-minded advertisers dependent on what the brand is, who the audience is that you're kind of talking to. And if it's a 20-something audience, it's got to be someone who is prepared to talk to that audience in the way in which that audience wants to be talked to, and not just have the brand kind of spoken to in their brand voice. And I think that's the kind of... And also, it will work better if you do that. But you have to be clear and market. I think you have to be clear.
Yeah. It feels like, I mean, I hear a lot of the talk about clarity, being clear with the labeling and that kind of thing, but it feels like there's a lot of shades of gray here. For example, if the brand isn't talking at all about anything that relates to its value proposition, then where's the value for the brand? And you talk about transparency, but maybe it feels like there's a lot more gray there, and especially in that transparency issue, that transparency doesn't feel like it's always transparent, and that visitors coming from search or social, for example, they have been trained not to look at this is sponsored by or this is a paid ad. They look at the headline and the body copy. So it feels like there's a lot of kind of bombast about be transparent, be clear, but that's not really what's happening. You can label it all you like, but it's not as transparent as we'd like.
Yeah. I think, the responsibility on the brand to thinking of what is the long-term strategy, right? Why do you use, content? And, in our world, content marketing is about the creation, the distribution, again, to Abby's point, of valuable content with a goal. It's all about the end goal. The goal is to attract, acquire, and engage an audience. It's not, necessarily, and that's really the experience that, a brand and can really, build brand affinity. If obviously, looking at brand engagement uplift and in the long term, what's the journey from content to commerce but I don't think that it needs to be very authentic from the beginning. To Abby's points, I think a brand needs to really find a long-term collaboration with a publisher that has that share the brand value and capture the audience of the brand. And again, if you do that and the brand also creates content, so not relying 100% on the publisher, having also a bit of content to bring authenticity, that really way that you can bring value to the consumer. And again, as long as it's engaging, it's entertaining, there's a lot of survey that shows that 71% of the consumers are prepared to trust a brand that's providing useful information but not trying to push a product message through. And I think that was just from the CMA recently, 84% of consumers are prepared to engage with a brand they trust. So we're going back to the trust notion both on the publisher side and on the brand. It's equally important. It's a shared responsibility.
Sure. Do you feel like if publishers get this wrong, there's a lot of people diving into native advertising from the publisher's side. If they get this wrong, are they hurting their long-term viability? Do you see that happening in the market with any publishers?
I think it's evolving, isn't it? And we have to work with all of us as publishers together, with the IAB, in order that we can kind of set guidelines, as we have done with kind of traditional media when we've talked about this. But I think it is evolving, and I think that it's not going to be the same for when you're talking to different audiences. How you mark something for one audience in one brand and in one environment. I think the context is absolutely critical in this. It's what is the message in the context that it's seen in, who's it going to, on what platform, and therefore what's the right kind of labeling to it. We all know, we know that it has to be clear, and that is what consumers are asking us to do. So how clear that is dependent on the environment that it is sitting in, I think. But I think it is evolving, and I think we have to kind of be listening to the consumer, we have to be listening to each other in how we're doing and learn, because I think we've got to constantly kind of test and learn.
Now Bauer Media is launching a vehicle, this debrief vehicle, which is very much going to be, I think, up to 50% funded by native advertising, which is relatively novel, I think. You've done some advertorial in the past, but that sounds like something new. It also feels relatively new for the market. What kinds of considerations and design planning went into that in terms of understanding market readiness and preparing a product that's going to be successful?
It all actually came, so it wasn't from the kind of explosion in the media press about talking from native advertising. It was actually talking to the consumer around how do they want to be talked to. And I think that is the premise of the brand, really understanding how do we talk to this 20-something audience in a kind of unvarnished environment. And being unvarnished means how do you therefore build in advertising messages to her, and out of that was kind of like there's an opportunity for us to work, and we then realised it's called native advertising, to kind of create with like-minded advertisers. So we kind of created a list of brands that we believed wanted to talk to this audience, found it difficult to reach her in an environment, in a context that she was talking in her language, as if she was with her friends. And we started talking to some brands of how might this work. is this aligned to what you're thinking? What are your kind of objectives? How might we work together in doing it? And I don't think it means that suddenly there's no banner advertising or anything like that. I think it's part of the marketing mix, and I think it depends on what are the objectives of that brand and how do we most effectively deliver those, and it can be part of that. But I think it really only works with brands who understand this audience and are prepared to talk to them in that certain voice.
You're making it a big part of the mix. How did you guys arrive at, I guess, some kind of calculation for what proportion of our revenue model should come from native advertising versus banners versus sponsorships of other kinds?
It was very scientific, obviously. Do you know what? We've just launched. We're a month in, and I think it's fair to say in the world that we're living in at the moment, it is a constant moving feast. I think we've seen it as an opportunity. We're in a test and learn beta kind of phase at the moment. We're working with a couple of brands in a native advertising way, so H&M and Bacardi and O2, and we're working with them and we're evolving. We're talking to them day in, day out about how is this working. We're working with Stephanie and her team, and I think we're learning day in, day out. And I think the business model today might not be the business model in 12 months' time, but I think it's already showing. If we look at the content that is created with brands like H&M and Bacardi, that content is shared in the same way that our other content is shared, because it's great content and it's value adding. And the business model will evolve over time, and I think that's about the size of the audience that we reach, the engagement of that audience, and there will be lots of different measures that kind of go. But we're very much kind of in test and learn at the moment.
Right. I mean, you're working with a number of like H&M, you mentioned Bacardi. Do you feel like most marketers, or to what proportion of marketers are really ready for this kind of promotion?
I think everybody is talking about it, but I think some are more advanced and some are more prepared to be flexible with the rules, I suppose, and reshaping what the rules are and working with brands on different levels. But in the fashion market with Grazia, we've been working with brands who are like-minded brands for a long time, creating content with them that we believe is just as valuable. The content that we worked with. So we did a kind of Grazia Fashion Live, and that was just great content, behind the scenes at Fashion World with LG. But it was just in a different kind of way that was brought to them, but it was equally really valuable content to our consumer. And I think it isn't something that is brand new. I think it is changing as content and context and environment kind of changes, and as our consumers change, we have to evolve with it.
It's an evolution. And you're working with a number of different publishers and a number of different marketers. Yeah. So who's doing it the best, I suppose?
So I think just going back, I want to go back to your question before about risk, especially for media brands around native advertising. I truly believe that the opportunities actually far outweigh the risk. There is a risk, and we've discussed, the importance on trust and transparency. But, looking from, a media, a publisher perspective, I think, native advertising offers a lot of things. First of all, you can have a direct relationship with the advertiser now, because native advertising, are a format that lends itself very well with high involvement from the publisher. It commands higher CPM. So this is really, important, because those two things have been taken away from the publisher with the shift to programmatic buying. So again, direct access to your audience, higher CPM, and also it helps solving, and I think, Ryan, in your latest research, you touch on the point that it could help solving the mobile challenge for publisher in the long run, because native advertising, again, is platform agnostic and sits very well in the mobile environment. We all know that publishers today are challenged by the fact that they're getting more and more of traffic from mobile device. 80% of the users don't click on any ads on mobile because they're too intrusive. And we know that the RPM for publishers on mobile are 80% less than what they are on desktop. So it's a huge challenge. Truly, we believe that native advertising offers a solution for long-term engagement. We're actually seeing it. So to your question about who is doing well, we work with a lot of publishers, optimizing their mobile inventory. And what we're seeing is actually the conversion rate are amazing. We're seeing CTR, double-digit CTR on mobile device. Again, if you think of mobile, user want to engage with the device. So as long as it's adding value. It's not intrusive. People will engage. So, we can really help solving that.